This is not legal advice. I am not stating to you that if you use these templates and you use the documents that I'm using or that I've prepared, that you will have any success. These are just tools to help you. They have not been tried and proven as successful, nor can they be. Nor have they been tried and proved to be unsuccessful, nor can they be, because everything is on a case-by-case basis. But I believe, based off of my research, these documents with my explanation will put you in the best place to be able to discharge debt, to understand more about it than you have up to this point, and to actually give you a working understanding of how to pursue it to potentially get a remedy. That's my goal with this. And again, you have these templates here. None of this is legal advice. Do all of this at your own risk. So we're looking at here, let's first zoom out, take an overview of the document. See how far I can zoom out. I can only go so far. Let's see. Here we go. So here's my banker's acceptance. It's limited to 1 page. This down here is a few notes that I have on this. Actually, let's look at these notes though. I could have said a lot more than this, but let's start with Uniform Commercial Code, Article 3, Section 603B. And what that basically says, if tender of payment of an obligation to pay an instrument is made to a person entitled to enforce the instrument and the tender is refused, there is discharge to the extent of the amount of the tender. Right? It's kind of self-explanatory, so I'm going to read it again. If tender of a payment, and in this example, this banker's acceptance, that's supposed to say banker's acceptance. It says banner's acceptance right here. But this is going to be tender of a payment on an obligation, which is a promissory note, or somebody servicing a note says, you know, you have this obligation. So if the private banker of my estate, think about that. If tender of a payment of an obligation to pay an instrument is made to a person entitled to enforce the instrument and the tender is refused, there is discharge to the extent of the amount of the tender. So this is the thinking under the Uniform Commercial Code of presenting this draft or this banker's acceptance. So this means if he refuses it, but how can I know whether there was acceptance or refusal? It says, and if the tender is refused, how do I have evidence of a refusal? So there's a debt to be paid. This is my acceptance on it, because from my understanding, when you change the definition of money, right, under the Constitution, money was gold and silver, but under the bankrupts or under the national and banking emergency and the monetary system, there is now new money. And they talk about that, the new money, which is bankers' acceptances, notes, drafts, and these things that we're doing. So this is the new money that is used as collateral that the Fed uses to give to the Treasury. So the point is, this banker's acceptance is a form of the new money. And where was I going with that? Oh yeah. So refusal, right? This is the banker's acceptance. And if there's a refusal, so this is what I was getting at. It is very basic, but some people overlook this. How do you know if there was refusal of the payment, of the tender of payment? How do you know if they accepted it or refused it? You may say, well, they would have sent me a satisfaction of debt, or they would have reflected in my account update. Yeah, maybe, but I want you to look at UCC section 3-505B, or record of protest. This is what a notary protest is for, to certify honor or dishonor of a tender of payment, right? So this record of protest is going to give you a record of evidence whether the tender is refused or if the tender is accepted. So let's look at that. Or do I already have that note? So let's click on it. Let me start working right about now. Hopefully that's not going to be too long. A record of protest. Actually, it's called evidence of dishonor, right? That's what it says right here at the top of the code. And what section was that specifically? We looked at 305B. So let's go back here. 305, let's go straight down here to B. Here's what B says. Let me zoom in so you can see it. A protest is a certificate of dishonor made by the United States consul, vice consul, or a notary public or other person authorized to administer oaths by the law of the place where dishonor occurs. It may be made upon information satisfactory to that person. That's saying the notary can issue a certificate of protest based on information satisfactory to the notary. The protest must identify the instrument, right? In our case, the banker's acceptance was the instrument, and certify either that presentment has been made or if not made, the reason why it was not made, and that the instrument has been dishonored by non-acceptance or non-payment. So he's going to certify that the presentment was made or that presentment was not made, and that the instrument was dishonored by non-acceptance or non-performance. Now, this is why we say do a notary presentment. When people talk about that's the notary presenting your commercial instrument as an agent on your behalf so that the notary can have firsthand knowledge to witness and certify whether there was non-acceptance or whether there was non-payment. You know, whether the person you presented the instrument to as an agent of the Federal Reserve went to the Treasury and the Treasury dishonored the instrument and they have evidence of that, they come back and say, it was dishonored by non-payment because your bank wouldn't pay the instrument. Then there's a liability on your book still. But that's what we haven't seen yet. They have never showed us the evidence of dishonor. What tends to happen is there's a dishonor by non-acceptance. And that's what the notary can certify in the form of a certificate of protest. And that certificate of protest in your hands is evidence along with your proof of payment, for example. So just think about that. The protest is an actual record. And of course, on thctrust.org, we got a template of what a notary protest looks like. You can Google it. And this is why you have to have knowledgeable notaries, right? Notaries who are willing to do protests. Very simple. We just seen that you can do it. So, the notary protest is an evidence of dishonor, and that shows that tender was refused. And we already know that if we put the instrument in the right person's hands and tender is refused, then there's discharge, right? At least this is what the Uniform Commercial Code says. And I'm showing you this because, yeah, it's easy to read that, but in practice, maybe at some point after you do your administrative procedure, you might have to litigate these points. Or maybe not, but it's very important. This is the basis. This is your foundational basis of, presenting this instrument for discharge. So what that looks like is just the issuance of a certificate. You can Google notary protest. Look on the channel. There's a video about the notary protest. So now that we understand the purpose of it, let's look at one other thing too. Okay, actually I have them down here. So let's look at the structure of this banker's acceptance real quick, right? But first, I want to start here. Down here in the disclosures, we put this congressional record, March 9th, 1933, HR 1491, page 83. Right, this is congressional records. That's why we put this in here. Let's Google it and see what pops up. This is what pops up. If you notice in the memorandum of law, all of these things that I've been talking about with discharging debt and things, they're all in the memorandum of lawful obligations of the United States on thttrust.org. That's that 2.5 pages of memorandum of law. All of them is in there. I'm waiting for this to come up here. And this is the 73rd congressional record, first session. Let's look at page 83, right? Because that thing we just cited, it said page 83. And let's see, 54. '78, page 83. I think I just sent it. Here we go. All right, they're talking about the new system or the new plan. The money so issued will not have 1 penny of gold coverage behind it because it's not really needed. We do not need gold to back our internal currency. We only need gold to settle our balances with foreign countries. Our people do not actually use gold as a medium of exchange. Paper money is just as good as is much easier to handle. However, if gold is desired as backing for paper money, we have a sufficient amount to permit the issuance of I think it says 5 billion or more money, and it's still gold reserve. But that's not actually what I was looking for in here. Okay, this is what I was looking for. Right here, highlight this here. Under the new law, the money, right? They're talking about the new law because the old law, we know that money is substance-backed currency, gold or silver. Constitutional money, per se. But this says, under this Emergency Banking Act, actually, what is this? I'm not going to go. This is the, I think this is the Emergency Banking Act. Under the new law, the money is issued to the banks in return for government obligations, bills of exchange, drafts, notes, trade acceptances, bankers' acceptances. The money will be worth 100 cents on the dollar because it is backed by the credit of the nation. It will represent a mortgage on all homes and other property of all the people in the nation. You see, under the new law, money will be issued to the banks in return for government obligations. Excuse me. It reminds me of something that Redress was pointing out to me and showing me. Oh, excuse me. It reminds me of something that Eon was showing me and pointing out to me. That, for example, when you apply for a loan and there's a promissory note and you go to some lender, what that so-called lender actually is an agent, and they take an application with that note and some other paperwork and powers of attorney granted by you, and in your name and on your behalf as a bank, they do some private banking. What they do is some banking, whether it's private or public, I really don't know. But basically, they take that application and the other documents and they apply for some new money, right? Under the new law, the money is issued to the banks in return for government obligations. The government obligations is your promise to pay, the promissory note. They took that in your name with the application as your agent and applied for some new money, right? That new money is issued to the banks in return for government obligations, bills of exchange, drafts, notes like your promissory notes, trade acceptances, and bankers' acceptances. So I'm just showing you this banker's acceptance, also known as a draft, should constitute new money by what we're looking at here, right? Under the new money system, unless they're discriminating, of course. Who's authorized to have access to currency and who can't, right? So, I don't know, just some things to think about. But now I just want you to understand the basis of why we're doing and where we're coming from with this. And this is just, there's a whole, as I say, memorandum of law. I didn't attach it to this instrument. I just pulled a couple of them out and put them here as a reference, right? And these are just disclosures that I just threw down here. When you do this instrument, You could replace this with any references that you think is relevant to the transaction. Just slap it down here. It's really just a placeholder. I had this place disclosure and I was like, what can I put down here? So there's some other important ones in there, but I'm not going to really go through that because actually this instrument, you don't want to have all, this is like really in the background. The instrument, as we'll see, is very basic. Let's go back one more time. Zoom out a little. How did I do that last time? Zoom out. Try this one more time. Okay. So one thing we have here is I put a place for Medallion Stamp signature guarantee. This is going to be very difficult for the majority of people to get. You probably won't be able to get it. I've been able to get a Medallion Stamp several times on different instruments from bonds and promissory notes just throughout my study. Before I understood it, and even as I understand it now, and that's why I know a lot of you are going to have a difficulty getting this. So especially if you want them to Medallion Stamp a promissory note, or excuse me, let's just say a note or a banker's acceptance or a draft or a commercial instrument that you're going to use to discharge something, the majority of them are going to say no because it's strange, it's foreign, they haven't seen it before. They probably won't understand what you're doing, but they're just going to say no. You're not authorized or whatever. If you have a personal banker relationship with somebody who's going to do this for you and not scrutinize or question your transaction, or question or make a determination about the legitimacy of your transaction, which I believe they're not allowed to do, but I'm telling you, they're going to do it anyway. So I'm just giving you the 100. It's not an easy task, but it can be done. And if I had to do this, I'm certain that I could get it done. So I'm trying to explain to you, it takes some diligence. One thing is your paperwork's got to be pretty much near flawless. You have to understand everything in it, and all your, there can't be any errors, especially that they're gonna catch, because it's gonna make you look crazy. Like earlier I pointed out, like this would, trust me, I would catch this just because of these errors in the templates. If I was really doing this, it wouldn't say banner's acceptance, it would say banker's acceptance, right? So, knowing what you got going on, not doing a lot of extra talking unless that person's your friend, that you already have the relationship and they're not, and then go in there, being about your business, not looking like you don't know, looking confident and being certain. And that's how you will get this done. The Medallion Stamp is, as I just said, it's for authorization of a securities transfer, basically. So you can look that up. There's a whole manual. I'll put it under here. It's called the Stamp Manual, Securities Transfer Agent Medallion Program, or something like that. I'm going to post it under here. Actually, let's Google it. Let's Google it so we can pull that manual up. So this is just for you to do your own research so you know everything about the Medallion Stamp before you request it or attempt to try to get it. Securities Transfer Association Guidelines, updated January 2019. And this is going to go through all of the different types of transactions, all of the different types of authorities. It's going to go through everything. So you can read through this guideline. You see I got highlights and notes in here and things like that. All right. So now, so this is a security transfer, right? Because I'm trying to discharge a debt, and this is what your whole master discharge indemnity bond is from the secured party creditor process. This is the security over here. The security, right, is my private bond. What's that private bond number? Well, when you do your secured party creditor filing, Usually your master discharge indemnity bond, it has a registered mail number, but you also have a private number that's assigned from your estate directly for that bond. So that's your private bond number. Then you have your registered mail number, the number where it went to the holder in due course, the Secretary of the Treasury. Then you have the date it was recorded, your secured party creditor filing, basically in the office that it was recorded in. This is identifying the private registered set-off bond, the actual asset or account from which you are withdrawing or transferring from, right? You're authorizing a transfer for this private master discharge indemnity bond on file with the Treasury or secured party creditor. As a draft, as a banker, you're accepting the obligation. I accept this obligation, accept for value, return for value. This signature, you're pretty much authorizing the transfer for this master discharge indemnification bond, basically. So if you can get that done and you get your medallion stamp on this banker's guarantee, I think you have a very strong chance of getting that debt discharged, meaning being successful with your enforcement procedure. It ain't going to be the end of the day. You're going to have to see this thing all the way through the end. So let's just go over this instrument real quick, and then let's see if there's anything else to touch on or close it out. So again, I made this into a form because usually what I've seen by my own observation, going in there and having the medallion stamped and seeing it used in different transactions, the majority of the time it's done on a form. Although it can be applied to an instrument, it can be applied directly to a certificate of live birth. The procedures for that are in the manual that I put on the screen earlier, how it's done. But I noticed that everybody does it on a form. So I said, let's create a form from the private bank and trust. So this is a transfer form, basically, is what you have. And as again, there's the private asset, there's the registered bond. We're authorizing a transfer, right? Because as we said before, the private registered set-off bond is used to discharge the obligations of bills and notes. So they're trying to hit me with this bill. I'm putting my banker's acceptance, which is a bill of exchange to some degree, and it's also a draft, and it's also eligible collateral that the Fed issues money for. And maybe that's the way to say it, or the new money, under the new money system. So this is a transfer form, banker's acceptance, and then I give it an instrument number. Now, in your secured party creditor filings, usually the standard filings, there's a series of numbers where you have your master discharge indemnity bond, which is the first instrument, and then you have a series of 1,000 other numbers, or however many. Kind of like when you get a check, you get a whole bunch of series of numbers. This is just the number for that first instrument, which is already collateralized or securitized under your estate. So this is the instrument number. It's a transfer form. I have the banker's acceptance. Who's the tenderer? The John Alex Doe. That's what the JAD is. John Alex Doe Private Bank and Trust. Remember, if we went through the personal status correction menu, you've set up your private bank and trust tax ID number for the private banker and trustee. This is the good through date. This is the instrument, for example, the banker's acceptance. We're going to use it. This is an acceptance on a debt obligation. So before we got here, we asked for a payoff statement. We got the payoff statement. Then this is our written banker's acceptance. Notice we got the John Alex Doe Private Bank and Trust. It also has a private address with a private mailbox number, right? So John Doe Private Bank and Trust with the tax ID number. I got to do a video. I'm going to do that video again too next. The John Alex Doe Bank and Trust Private Tax ID number. Actually, no, I did already do that. It's in the personal status correction menu. It's the third video in that series of 3. Now here's the acceptance. So here's the verbiage. It's common sense when you listen to what it says. This is what we're saying. Accepted for the sum of $600,000 for tender of accord in full satisfaction and release of the underlying obligation related to payoff statement 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dated, etc., related to account number, whatever. So let me read that again. So this is like we request a payoff statement, we get a payoff statement. This is our banker's acceptance. Accept it for the sum of 500,000 for tender of accord in full satisfaction. This needs to be reworded. I must have been sleepy when I did this part, but I know this is not right, but that's not a problem. It's just small stuff. It's for tender for satisfaction in accord or something like that. You know. Well, actually, no, that is right. I looked it up. We say satisfaction accord, but it's actually accord in full satisfaction. So it sounds funny, but it is correct. So excuse me. Accept it, for the sum of 500,000 for tender of accord and full satisfaction and release of the underlying obligation related to payoff statement 123 dated etc. related to the underlying loan account, whatever. Pay to the order of capital source 1 through the holder in due course Janet Yellen, United States Treasury, redeem in lawful money, charge the same to the account of John Alex Doe, private bond for set off, etc. So basically what we're saying is we accept the obligation, right? We don't argue about the legitimacy of the debt. We accept the obligation, and then we give the instructions in the draft, pay to the order of capital 1, whoever. Through holder in due course Janet Yellen, Secretary of the Treasury. Because basically you have to put the instructions of who your bank is. People, I've been guilty of saying pay to the order of the United States just because other people have said it. It just, look at what the words that you're saying and make sure that they make sense. Look up what those instructions mean, pay to the order of. Don't try to make it fit the narrative you want it to fit. Read what it says and make it make sense to yourself. I hope I'm making sense to y'all. So you're accepting it for the sum of whatever paid to the order of who's ever demanding the payment through the holder in due course, because you're actually calling upon the master discharging indemnity bond for this debt. So through the holder in due course, Secretary of the Treasury, and you're putting the address in there because it's important that you put the addresses when you're talking about these bills of, these bills and these drafts. Redeem in lawful money. That's an instruction. You're instructing the fiduciary, Janet Yellen, to redeem this debt obligation that you've accepted. Redeem it for the person who's presenting it. Redeem it in lawful money. And charge the same to where they're going to get the lawful money to. They're going to charge it to the private registered set-off bond. That's your secured party creditor filing. It's right here. And this signature guarantee will securitize this instrument if they'll give it to you. And now you have a bona fide banker's acceptance for discharge. Now that you have this instrument and it's all done, what would you do? Right? Well, that's where you got to go now. Give it to your notary and let your notary do the presentment. And if you don't know what the notary presentment is, start with, go under the fundamentals video, or go under the, where was it at? Fundamentals, Bait Foundation, and then go under administrative procedure. Actually, just go right here, administrative procedure. Understand what the administrative process is, and then understand what a notary protest is. They're two separate things, but you run the notary protest just like an administrative process. So you're going to give your instrument to your notary, have them present the tender of payment, and then they will issue the protest, which is the evidence of the dishonor that you need. Now, here's the other thing. What else I would put with this? So here's the 3 core things that I really think you would need. If you could get your private banker's acceptance, especially with a medallion stamp, first thing you request a payoff statement. This references the actual payoff statement in this banker's acceptance here. And then you present it to them via a notary protest, registered mail. Your notary sends it, and your notary gives you a certificate of protest. We're going to assume that they dishonor the instrument that they received with the medallion stamp. Well, the way I understand it, and these are just ideas and concepts, there's 2 1099s that need to be issued that should finish this bad boy up. The one 1099 would be a 1099 INT. And the reason that you're given a 1099 INT is, I would say that's because this medallion stamp instrument is like a cash instrument, especially when they accept it like that. So you you equivalently paid cash. So for that reason, you got to report that transaction, and the recipient of that instrument received interest from your estate because they got it from that private registered set-off bond, which is personal property of the estate, through your secured party creditor filing. So because you gave them that banker's acceptance, especially if there's a signature guarantee or medallion stamp on it, you should be issuing them a 1099 INT. And if you have your, as we stated earlier, private bank and trust set up, you can use that tax ID number for the issuance of that 1099 INT for that private instrument. So that's one thing. They got the medallion stamp instrument, the 1099 INT, where they're named as the recipient because they receive interest. Now, it's important, how do you fill out that 1099 INT? Was there any taxes withhold? Where does the funds go on the, that's for me to even study more. That's for all of us to study more. But I've been doing a lot of research, and it seems clear to me that if you give somebody a banker's acceptance in this type of form, which is basically a cash item once it has a signature guarantee on it, that it should be reported as income on a 1099 INT. They're the recipient of the income. So I also, by what I see, that actually will, the IRS will then require their books to account accordingly. So their 1099, their 1040, 1041, whatever type of tax return they file should account for the income received in their 1099 INT. Now also, because we read in the UCC, if tender of payment to a person entitled to enforce the instrument refuses to, if he refuses, then there is, what did it say, discharge. So upon the notary issuing a certificate of protest, I see that's also grounds for a 1099-C cancellation of debt. So it's looking like your instrument medallion stamp, your 1099 INT, your 1099-C cancellation of debt, and I believe the INT and the C will have the ability to force the accounting, right? Force it to happen. But your notary certificate of protest is a piece of evidence for you if you have to file a complaint for equitable relief in the court. That's a piece of evidence that supports what you've done. And of course, you will have, before you tender this instrument to them via the notary presentment, you will register this on the UCC3 first. I guess this came to my mind, and I'm going to speak a few more things about how you can get the medallion stamp signature guarantee. Set an appointment with your bank. If you bank with someplace like Chase or Wells Fargo, someplace where there's a bunch of those banks, I would say set like 2 appointments with 2 different banks, just in case you're unsuccessful the first time. You'll have a backup, and you could just keep doing it until you're successful. The more banks and credit unions that you already have a relationship with is the better your chances, because usually you're going to have to already have an account with one of these places for them to give you that service. It's going to be important that whatever's on your passport, your travel card, whatever you use as ID, that's what you probably also want on the account at the institution where you're going to ask for this service. Because basically, so I'm just saying, pay attention to your secured party creditor filing. Make sure the person who you reference as the trustee, I'm not saying you have to, but just make sure that you have an ID to reflect that. Because if you have to get a medallion stamp signature guarantee, they're going to want to make sure that the name matches the name that's on your ID. And if you're trying to do something of such that we're suggesting, right, authorize a private transfer for the private registered set-off bond, then your UCC1 financing statement is the statement that they're going to want to see. That's another thing. When you apply for any type of medallion stamp on a transaction, they're always going to ask for the statement from the account where you're transferring the securities from. This doesn't mean the statement from the dealership of the car you're trying to get. It doesn't mean the statement from the mortgage company of the house that you're trying to discharge. It means that you have a security in an account somewhere with some custodian or intermediary or some broker, and you're authorizing a transfer. You see how that is? So we're talking about our secured party creditor bond. So to get the medallion stamp, because you're usually going to need two forms of ID, or if you bank at the institution, they're already going to know who you are. And then even if they don't understand what they're asking for, they're going to be required to say, do you have a statement, a recent statement from the account? And they're talking about, in this specific case, your account would be your secured party creditor filing. So it'd be your UCC1, it'd be a copy of your registered master discharge indemnity bond, your UCC1 financing statement. That would be the statement they're talking about. So now I hope this makes sense what you see right here. Acceptance, that's your banker's acceptance, except for value. I could have said redeem and lawful money and all of that, but I just kept it basic. Accept it for the sum of whatever amount, which is the same amount that was on the payoff statement, paid to the order of, I'm directing where the payment needs to go, through the holder in due course, Janet Yellen, Secretary of the Treasury. I'm instructing the fiduciary to redeem it in lawful money and to charge the same to the John Alex Doe private bond for set off. That's the private bond number. And here's the other information so they can find my secured party creditor bond that I want them to charge it through. Here's my signature authorizing the transaction with the banker's acceptance, medallion stamp, signature guarantee. And then I'll say without prejudice, and I'll put my UCC filing number for my UCC filing statement, because I'm saying this signature does not prejudice any of my rights as a secured party creditor under this filing number, where I have the paramount claim of interest in the proceeds of the signature. Anyway, thank you for watching. Remember, please give this video a like, and if you're interested in having a coaching session or doing the yearly indefinite subscription to thctrust.org, information is below this video. And I hope you enjoyed this and got something out of it.